Alright, let's talk about the title of this video, why Deku has to fight his friends, as well as vice versa. And of course, I'm gonna go into what's going on in this chapter as well. So after the war ended, Izuku went into like a temporary coma, and in the coma, he had like a long conversation with the vestiges of One For All. And they basically went over what the rest of the series was going to be about. Izuku going after All For One and Shigaraki and taking them down once and for all. But of course, that's easier said than done. So after Izuku woke up from said coma, kind of had a paradigm shift within him. And that moment was like the beginning of the snowball effect that's going to lead us to what this chapter is about. But considering that Izuku is All For One's main target, since he has One For All, the main thing that he wants, he decided that he was going to have to take matters into his own hands and for the most part handle this by himself. And I say for the most part because he does allow the top three heroes, Endeavor, Hawks, and Best Jeanist, and All Might to assist him with this one final mission. But that's pretty much it, meaning that he has cut off every other single person in his life in pursuit of this final goal. And that's exactly what he did, because at this point he just ghosts everyone. And it's even implied that he has All Might leave these pre-written letters for all of Class 1A. And in these letters, he finally reveals to everyone the big secret about One For All, the history of it, and why All For One is after him. And with that is the reason why he has to leave all of them, because he's going to put them at risk if he is around them. Because like we established, All For One only wants Izuku because he has One For All. And this weighs very heavy on Izuku because he saw firsthand in the war what happens to people that he cares about when All For One gets involved. And we're reminded of that in this chapter because in the sequence when Ojiro has Izuku wrapped up, he says, "But if I'm around, I'll put everyone else in danger. All For One is going to take me away. That's why I left." And he's remembering moments in the war when Aizawa, Gran Torino, and Bakugo were all seriously maimed or injured by All For One. And when we, the fandom, were reading these chapters as they were being released, we really didn't even know what the fate of these characters were going to be. I mean, we assumed that Bakugo was going to live, but a lot of us, including myself, thought that Gran Torino was probably dead. So to stop that from ever happening again, Izuku has decided to just remove everyone he cares about from his life and to just exile himself until the job is done. And in this exile, he had become like a one-man army, like pseudo-vigilante, taking care of as many of the villains that broke out of Tartarus that are in cahoots with All For One as he could, hoping that along the way, this will lead him to All For One. And at a point, it almost does, but it's revealed that All For One is just always one step ahead of Izuku. And over time, this extremely hectic lifestyle that Izuku has adopted slowly started to change him. You yourself can see it happening real time. If you read from like chapter 306 to the current chapter, you can see Izuku's metamorphosis into what he is now. And it's kind of like a hardened, obsessed version of Izuku that has like this unintentional villain aesthetic. And that comes from the lifestyle that he's been living, because it's implied that he's been taking like no breaks and he's just been going from like danger sense to danger sense. I mean, it's even mentioned by Kaminari in this chapter that like he needs to take a bath. So yeah, his hygiene is suffering as well. And while all this was happening, Class 1A finally took it upon themselves to take some action and to bring their friend back. So they wind up orchestrating this meeting with Nezu and Endeavor, and with the latter's help, they're able to track down Izuku's location. And in the previous chapter, they eventually find him, and that leads us to this chapter. And here we see all of Class 1A trying to forcefully take Izuku back. Because as we've established, he's not going to willingly go back because he's like in this manic, obsessed state right now. And he's fully convinced himself that unless he takes care of All For One and finishes all of this by himself, that he can't go back to his normal life. In fact, he can't even smile until the job is done. So that's why we see in this chapter Izuku is pretty much fighting to run away from his friends here, because he feels that even just being around them in this moment is already enough to put their lives at risk. So that being said, he's definitely not going back to UA where more lives are at risk. But Class 1A isn't in a manic state, and they're probably seeing things more clearly than Izuku is. So this is why we see them forcefully trying to bring him back, especially now that they got confirmation from Nezu in the previous chapter. And all of that together gives us this great chapter, which is probably the only time in the series where we're ever going to get to see Izuku fighting against Class 1A, which is something that I've personally wanted for a while now, or at least since Izuku started to seriously progress in power. But also, this is the deepest that a fight between them is ever going to go. I don't really think this fight is ever going to progress any more than like a cat and mouse type thing. I highly doubt they're going to be like exchanging blows or anything like that. I mean, maybe in the next chapter we'll see Bakugo try to physically take him down with some explosions or something. And it's possible that we also might see Ida, you know, get a little physical with him. But aside from that, I'm thinking that this altercation is going to be light on the violence. And that's fine because it doesn't really need it, and it would be kind of uncharacteristic of everyone if that did happen, you know, aside from like Bakugo. And another little fun thing that we're seeing in this chapter is that the Class 1A students that are on Spotlight in this chapter are all getting like their own little moments and a way to relate back to Izuku. They'll come across Izuku, they'll try to stop him from moving with their own, you know, move set. And then they'll be like, hey, remember that time when we had that one moment in the series? Wasn't that fun? Come back now. And it made me think that like, oh, well, I guess Izuku did have at least one moment with everyone from Class 1A. And I get that it's kind of difficult to manage over 20 characters in a series, but I appreciate that there's at least one little moment there that can be called back here and give them all mutual motivation. This is also another way to put on spotlight the improvements that Class 1A has made as well, because obviously we don't get to see these characters a lot. Going back to what I said about it's difficult to handle over 20 characters and give them all arcs and progression and whatnot, but I think Horikoshi is handling it well here. Like, this isn't One Piece. We're not gonna get, you know, 30 chapters dedicated to just all the ancillary characters. And then coming to the end of the chapter, we're seeing him encounter like Shoto and Tsuyu, which shows that there's still going to be more to this sequence, especially with the ending narration here that says, you know, headed to the versus Class 1A's climax, meaning it's not over yet, especially since we haven't seen Ida and Bakugo like get their hands dirty with Izuku. So where's all of this headed? Well, I'm assuming that Class 1A is going to be successful here in subduing Izuku. And while he is nigh overpowered at this point, he's still very exhausted. Like we talked about, he's living this crazy, manic, unsustainable lifestyle, so he's not at peak performance here, while they're all pretty fresh for the most part. And Bakugo also briefed them on what his quirks were. I mean, he's not aware of Fa-Jin and whatever the second user's quirk is, because that information wasn't available in the One For All quirk users notebook that All Might gave Bakugo and Izuku a couple arcs back. But yeah, I fully expect them to bring him back, and then that's probably going to lead us into the beginning of the final like long arc of the series maybe. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments. What do you think is going to happen in the next one? If you liked the video, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.